The only sound in the dry California heat was the rhythmic scrubbing of fabric against the washboard, and when Garrett Brennan rode past the creek for the third day in a row, he saw her washing the same faded blue dress again. The young woman was bent over the water, her dark hair escaping from its pins as she worked the soap into the threadbare cotton with hands that were red and raw from the effort. It was June of 1884, and Watsonville, California, was a town that had seen its share of hardship, but something about the sight of this woman washing the same garment over and over again struck him as particularly heartbreaking. Garrett pulled his horse to a stop near the cottonwood tree that shaded part of the creek. He had noticed her the first time 2 days ago, recognized the dress yesterday, and now seeing it again today made him certain. She wore the dress wet each time, he realized, washing it in the morning and letting it dry on her body throughout the day before washing it again the next morning. The fabric clung to her thin frame, and he could see how carefully she tried to preserve the modest garment even as it fell apart in her hands. "Morning, miss," he called out, keeping his distance so as not to startle her. She looked up quickly, her green eyes wide with surprise and something like fear. She was younger than he had thought from a distance, perhaps 20 or 21, with delicate features that were pinched with hunger and exhaustion. "Morning," she replied cautiously, her hands stilling on the dress. "I have been riding this way the past few days," Garrett said, dismounting slowly so she could see his movements were not threatening. "Could not help but notice you have been working awful hard on that dress." A flush of embarrassment colored her pale cheeks. "It is the only one I have," she said quietly, her chin lifting with a pride that her circumstances tried to deny her. "I prefer to keep it clean." Garrett was a tall man of 26, weathered by years of working cattle ranches across California, with dark blonde hair and blue eyes that had seen both kindness and cruelty in equal measure. He had money saved from years of careful living, enough to buy a small spread of his own when the right opportunity came. But right now, standing before this woman whose name he did not even know, all he could think about was how wrong it seemed that anyone should have to wash the same dress every single day because they had nothing else. "My name is Garrett Brennan," he said, taking off his hat. "I work at the Patterson Ranch just north of here. Been there about 3 months now." "Grace Owens," she replied, wringing the water from the dress with strong hands despite their raw appearance. "I have been in Watsonville for 2 weeks. You have family here?" Her expression closed off slightly. "No. I came from Sacramento after my father passed. He was all I had left, and when he died, there was nothing to keep me there. I thought I might find work here, but most places want someone with more experience or connections." She paused, then added with bitter honesty, "Or someone who does not show up in a dress that has been washed so many times the seams are giving way." Garrett considered his next words carefully. He was not the kind of man who acted rashly or made promises he could not keep, but there was something about Grace Owens that called to something deep in his chest. Maybe it was the way she held her head high, even as she explained her poverty. Maybe it was the determined set of her jaw, or the careful way she treated her only possession. Or maybe it was simply that he recognized in her the same kind of loneliness that had followed him from town to town for years. "Miss Owens, I would like to make you a proposal of the most respectable kind," he said. "There is a dress shop in town, run by Mrs. Eleanor Hartley. She makes fine garments and also keeps ready-made items for those who need them quicker. I would like to purchase you 7 dresses, one for each day of the week, so you do not have to wash the same one every morning." Grace stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. "You want to buy me dresses? Sir, I do not even know you. That would be entirely inappropriate, and I could not possibly accept such a gift from a stranger." "Then let us not be strangers," Garrett said. "Allow me to buy you breakfast at the hotel dining room, somewhere public and proper. We can talk, and you can tell me to go to blazes if you decide I am some kind of scoundrel. But if you think I might be a decent man trying to do a decent thing, then perhaps you will let me help." She looked down at the dress in her hands, at the way the morning light showed every thin patch and weak seam. He could see the war playing out across her face, pride battling with practicality, suspicion fighting against what he hoped was recognition of genuine kindness. "Why would you do this for someone you do not know?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Garrett thought about all the years he had drifted, working hard and saving money, but never finding a place that felt like home or a person who made him want to stay. He thought about his own mother, who had raised him alone after his father died in a mining accident, and how she had worked her fingers to the bone to keep them fed and clothed. He thought about how much it would have meant to her if someone had offered help when she needed it most. "Because you remind me that there is still good in this world worth protecting," he said simply, "and because no one should have to wear a wet dress every day just to keep it clean." Grace stood slowly, the dress dripping water onto the dusty ground. She studied his face for a long moment, and whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she finally nodded. "Breakfast then, but I cannot go anywhere like this." She gestured to her soaked dress with a rueful expression. "I will wait by the main road," Garrett said. "Take your time." He returned to his horse and led it up toward the road, giving her privacy to change into the dress once it had dried enough to be wearable. As he waited, he wondered what he was doing. Garrett Brennan was not an impulsive man. He did not offer to buy clothes for women he had just met. But there was something about Grace Owens that had reached past all his careful defenses and grabbed hold of something essential. He wanted to know her story. He wanted to see her smile. He wanted to be the reason she stopped looking so worn down by the world. When Grace appeared about 20 minutes later, the dress was still damp in places, but decent enough for public viewing. She had repinned her hair and wiped the creek water from her face. Even in her threadbare clothing, she moved with a natural grace that suited her name. Garrett offered his arm as they walked into town, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. The Watsonville Hotel dining room was a respectable establishment where local businessmen ate breakfast and ranch owners met to discuss cattle prices. Several heads turned when Garrett entered with Grace on his arm, and he could see the speculation beginning already. Small towns were the same everywhere. People talked and they remembered, and a cowboy having breakfast with an unknown young woman would be fodder for gossip before the eggs were even served. "Let them look," Garrett said quietly, as he held out a chair for Grace. "You have done nothing wrong, and neither have I." Grace sat with the careful posture of someone who had been taught proper manners in better times. When the waitress came, Garrett ordered coffee, eggs, bacon, biscuits with gravy, and fried potatoes. Grace started to protest the amount of food, but he shook his head. "When did you last have a proper meal?" he asked bluntly. She looked away. "I have been managing." "That is not what I asked." 4 days ago, a woman at the church gave me some bread and cheese." Garrett felt anger kindle in his chest, not at Grace, but at the circumstances that had brought her to this point. "Then you will eat breakfast, and you will not argue with me about it." The food came quickly, and Garrett watched as Grace tried to eat slowly and maintain her dignity, even though he could tell she was ravenous. He ate his own meal and kept up a steady stream of conversation to give her privacy in her hunger. "I came to California from Kansas 5 years ago," he told her. "My mother passed, and there was nothing left for me there. I worked ranches from San Diego to Sacramento, learning everything I could about cattle and horses and land management. I have been saving money to buy my own place someday, somewhere with good water and grass where I can build something that lasts." "That sounds like a fine dream," Grace said between bites of biscuit. "Do you think you will stay in this area?" "I have been considering it. The land around Watsonville is good, and the town seems decent enough. There are opportunities here for a man willing to work hard." He paused. "What about you? What brought you to this particular town?" Grace finished her coffee before answering. "After my father died, I found myself with very few options. He was a clerk for a shipping company, and we lived modestly but comfortably. When he got sick, I used what little savings we had for doctors and medicine. After he passed, I discovered he owed money I had not known about. The landlord took everything of value for back rent, and I left Sacramento with only the clothes on my back. Why Watsonville? I heard there was work in the canneries and farms. I thought I could find employment and start over. But when I arrived, I learned that most positions were already filled for the season. I have been sleeping in an abandoned shed near the creek and looking for any kind of work. A few people have given me odd jobs, washing clothes or cleaning, but nothing steady. Garrett poured her more coffee from the pot the waitress had left on the table. Can you cook? Yes, quite well, actually. My mother taught me before she died when I was 15. Can you sew? Adequately. I am better with mending than making new garments, but I can manage both. Can you read and write? Of course. My father believed in education. I can do figures as well, and I have a fair hand with correspondence. Grace looked at him curiously. Why do you ask? Because I am thinking about what kind of work might suit you, Garrett said. But first things first, after we finish here, we are going to Mrs. Hartley's dress shop, and I am going to make good on my offer. Mr. Brennan, I cannot let you spend that kind of money on me. It would not be right. Garrett, he corrected, and you can and will let me help you. Consider it an investment. An investment in what? He met her eyes across the table, those green eyes that held both strength and vulnerability in equal measure. In someone who deserves a fair chance, in someone who has pride enough to wash the same dress 3 times rather than give up and accept defeat. In someone I would like to get to know better, if you will allow it. Grace's cheeks flushed pink, and she looked down at her empty plate. I do not understand why you are doing this. Maybe I do not fully understand it myself yet, Garrett admitted. But I know that I saw you at that creek, working so hard to maintain your dignity with nothing but a worn-out dress to your name, and I knew I had to do something. So please, Grace, let me do this one thing. After that, if you never want to see me again, I will respect your wishes. But at least you will have decent clothes to wear while you figure out your next steps. She was quiet for a long moment, and he could see her struggling with the decision. Finally, she raised her eyes to his and nodded. All right, but I will find a way to repay you someday. I promise you that. Deal, Garrett said, though he had no intention of ever collecting on that debt. They left the hotel and walked down Main Street to Mrs. Hartley's dress shop. The proprietor was a kind-faced woman in her 50s who had been making and selling clothes in Watsonville for 20 years. She took one look at Grace's threadbare dress and immediately understood the situation. Come in, dear, Mrs. Hartley said warmly, ushering Grace toward the back of the shop where ready-made dresses hung on racks. Let us find you some things that will fit nicely. Mr. Brennan, you can wait up front or come back in an hour if you prefer. I will wait, Garrett said, settling into a chair near the window. For the next hour, he heard the quiet murmur of women's voices from the back room, occasional exclamations from Grace that sounded pleased, and the rustle of fabric. He used the time to think about what he was doing and where this might lead. He was not a fool. He knew that buying clothes for a woman he barely knew would cause talk. He knew that people would assume he expected something in return, but he also knew his own intentions were honorable, and that was what mattered. When Grace finally emerged from the back room wearing a new dress of soft green calico that brought out her eyes, Garrett felt his breath catch. She looked transformed. The dress fit her properly, with clean seams and a modest neckline. Her hair had been repinned more securely, and there was color in her cheeks that had not been there before. Mrs. Hartley found 6 more dresses that fit me well, Grace said softly. 7 in total, just as you said. 1 for each day of the week. Mrs. Hartley followed her out, carrying a wrapped package. I threw in some undergarments as well, the kind every woman needs, and a nightgown, because Lord knows she needs something decent to sleep in. No charge for those extras. Consider it my contribution to helping this young lady get back on her feet." Garrett stood and took out his wallet. "How much do I owe you, Mrs. Hartley?" The dressmaker named a price that was fair, but not cheap. Garrett paid without hesitation, then added an extra $1. "For your kindness," he said. "Mrs. Ziaz," Hartley smiled. "You are doing a good thing, Mr. Brennan. This town could use more men like you." She turned to Grace. "And you, dear, hold your head high. There is no shame in accepting help when you need it, and every reason to be grateful for someone who offers it with no strings attached." Grace clutched the package to her chest. "Thank you, Mrs. Hartley. You have been incredibly kind." Back on the street, Grace seemed overwhelmed. "I do not know what to say. This is more than I ever expected, more than I deserve." "You deserve much more than 7 dresses," Garrett said firmly. "Now let us discuss your living situation. You said you are staying in an abandoned shed." Grace nodded reluctantly. "It keeps the rain off, and I have not been bothered there." "That is not acceptable. Do you know Mrs. Patricia Chen, who runs the boarding house on Oak Street?" "I know of it, but I cannot afford a room." "I will pay for a week in advance. That gives you time to find work without worrying about where you will sleep." "Mr. Brennan, Garrett, you have already done too much." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Grace, I am going to be honest with you. I am not doing this because I pity you. I am doing this because in the 3 days I watched you washing that dress, I saw more strength and determination than I have seen in most men I have worked with. I saw someone who refuses to give up even when everything seems hopeless. That is the kind of person worth knowing. That is the kind of person worth helping. So please, let me arrange for a room at the boarding house. Give yourself a safe place to stay while you look for work." Tears welled in Grace's eyes. "Why are you so kind?" "Because someone should be," he said simply. "And because I would like to see you again, properly, without you having to worry about where your next meal will come from, or whether your only dress will survive another washing." She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "You want to court me? I would like the chance to get to know you better, yes, if that is something you might be interested in as well." Grace looked at him for a long moment, really looked at him as if trying to see into his soul. Whatever she found there must have pleased her, because a small smile curved her lips. "I think I would like that very much." They walked to Mrs. Chen's boarding house, where Garrett paid for a week's room and board. Mrs. Chen was a pragmatic woman who had come to California from China 15 years earlier with her husband. When he died in a construction accident, she had used their savings to buy the boarding house and had run it successfully ever since. She asked no questions about the arrangement, simply gave Grace a key and told her meals were served at 7 in the morning, noon, and 6 in the evening. The room was small but clean, with a bed, a washstand, a dresser, and a chair by the window. Grace set her package of dresses down carefully, as if they were made of gold instead of cotton. "I cannot believe this is real," she whispered. "It is real," Garrett assured her. "And you deserve every bit of it." He left her to settle in and returned to the Patterson Ranch, where he had a full afternoon of work ahead of him. But as he checked fences and moved cattle, his mind kept returning to Grace Owens, to her green eyes and determined spirit, to the way she had looked in that new green dress, to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he had found something in Watsonville worth staying for. Over the next few days, Garrett found reasons to be in town during his off hours. He would stop by the boarding house in the evening, and Grace would come down to sit on the porch with him. They talked about everything and nothing. She told him about growing up in Sacramento, about her mother, who had died too young, and her father, who had tried his best to raise her alone. She spoke of books she had read and places she hoped to see someday. He told her about Kansas, about working cattle drives, and learning the hard way that not all ranchers treated their workers fairly. He shared his dream of owning land, of building something permanent. "I have been drifting for 5 years," Garrett admitted one evening as they watched the sun set over the town, "working hard, saving money, but never really belonging anywhere. I think I was waiting for a reason to stop moving. Have you found one? Grace asked softly. He turned to look at her, this woman who had come into his life so unexpectedly. In just a few days, she had become important to him in a way he could not fully explain. I think maybe I have. Grace reached out and took his hand, a bold gesture for a woman as proper as she was. I am glad you stopped by the creek that day. I am glad you saw me washing my dress. I am glad you cared enough to help. So am I, Garrett said, squeezing her hand gently. But their peaceful courtship was not destined to remain simple. The following day, when Garrett came to town, he found Grace standing outside the general store talking to a man he did not recognize. The stranger was tall and thin, with greasy dark hair and a mustache that needed trimming. He stood too close to Grace, and even from a distance, Garrett could see the tension in her posture. He approached quickly, his hand instinctively checking that his gun was within reach. Grace, is everything all right? She turned to him with obvious relief. Garrett, this is Mr. Leonard Webb. He says he knew my father in Sacramento. Webb's eyes narrowed as he looked Garrett up and down. And who might you be, cowboy? Garrett Brennan, a friend of Miss Owens. A friend, Webb repeated with a sneer. Is that what they are calling it these days? I heard tell around town that some cowboy set her up in a boarding house and bought her a whole new wardrobe. Seems like mighty friendly behavior towards someone you just met. Garrett's jaw tightened. My relationship with Miss Owens is none of your concern. Now, if you will excuse us— Actually, it is my concern, Webb interrupted. You see, Grace's father owed me money. A considerable sum, in fact. $200 that I loaned him for his medical expenses. Before he died, he promised I would be repaid. Grace's face had gone pale. My father never mentioned any debt to you, Mr. Webb. Well, he would not have wanted to worry you, would he? But I have the paperwork right here. Webb pulled a folded document from his coat pocket. Signed and dated. The debt passes to his heir, which would be you. Garrett took the paper and examined it carefully. It did appear to be a legitimate promissory note, signed with a shaky hand that could have been a sick man's signature, but something about it felt wrong. This says the money was loaned in April of this year. Grace, when did your father pass? Early May, she said quietly. And you said you spent all your savings on doctors and medicine? Yes. Garrett looked at Webb. If her father had just borrowed $200 in April, why would there be no money left by early May? Where did those funds go? Webb shrugged. How should I know? Maybe he had other debts. Maybe he spent it on drink. The point is, he borrowed the money and did not pay it back. Now his daughter owes me. I do not have $200, Grace said, her voice shaking. I do not have anything. Mr. Webb, surely you can see that. I do not even know if that signature is really my father's. Are you calling me a liar? Webb's voice turned threatening. Garrett stepped between them. I am calling you a man who is conveniently producing a debt that no one else knew about, at a time when a young woman has no way to verify the claim. That seems suspicious to me. The law does not care what seems suspicious to you, cowboy. I have a legal document, and I intend to collect. If Miss Owens cannot pay in cash, then perhaps we can work out another arrangement. The way Webb looked at Grace when he said it made Garrett's blood boil. There will be no arrangement, Garrett said flatly. If you have a legitimate claim, take it to a lawyer. In the meantime, stay away from Miss Owens. Webb sneered again, but apparently decided not to push his luck with an angry cowboy who was armed and looked ready to use it. You have not heard the last of this, he said, before stalking away. Grace was shaking. What am I going to do? Even if the debt is not real, he has that paper. What if a judge believes him? Garrett put his arm around her shoulders, a protective gesture that felt entirely natural. We are going to see a lawyer. My boss, Mr. Patterson, uses a man named Charles Morton. He is sharp and honest. Let us see what he says about this supposed debt. They found Mr. Morton in his office above the bank. He was a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. Garrett explained the situation while Grace sat quietly, twisting her hands in her lap. Morton examined the promissory note carefully, holding it up to the light and checking the signature. "This could be legitimate," Morton said finally. "But there are some things that concern me. The ink looks fresher than it should be for a document that is supposedly 3 months old. The paper is not yellowed or worn. And the signature, while it could belong to a sick man, has some peculiarities that suggest it might have been traced rather than written naturally." "So it is a forgery?" Grace asked hopefully. "Possibly, but proving it in court would be difficult without someone who could testify about your father's actual handwriting. Do you have any letters or documents he signed?" Grace shook her head miserably. "Everything was taken by the landlord for back rent. I left Sacramento with nothing but my clothes." Morton tapped his fingers on the desk thoughtfully. "There is another angle we might pursue. If Leonard Webb is attempting to collect on fraudulent debts, this probably is not the first time he has done it. Let me ask around, see if anyone else in Sacramento or the surrounding areas has had dealings with him. If we can establish a pattern of fraud, that would strengthen your defense considerably." "How much will this cost?" Garrett asked. "For your services, I mean. For a case this interesting, let us call it a favor to Mr. Patterson, who has been a good client for many years. I will do some investigating and see what I can turn up. In the meantime, Miss Owens, I advise you to avoid Mr. Webb entirely. Do not speak to him, do not accept any papers from him, and do not let him bully or threaten you. If he approaches you again, document it. Write down the time, place, and what he said. That could be useful if this goes to court." They thanked Morton and left his office. Outside, Grace finally let herself show the fear she had been holding back. What if he wins? What if a judge believes him and orders me to pay? I would have to work for years to earn that much money, and even then, she could not finish the sentence. Garrett pulled her into an embrace right there on the street, not caring who saw. "That is not going to happen. We will figure this out together. You are not alone anymore, Grace. You have me, and I promise I will not let Webb hurt you." She clung to him, her face pressed against his chest. "You barely know me. Why are you fighting so hard for someone you just met?" "Because from the moment I saw you washing that dress for the third time, I knew you were someone special," Garrett said quietly. "Because in the past week, you have become more important to me than I ever thought possible. Because when I think about my future now, I see you in it. If that is too much too soon, tell me and I will step back. But that is the truth." Grace pulled back just enough to look up at him. "It is not too much. I feel it too, this connection between us. It does not make logical sense, but it is real. You make me feel safe in a way I have not felt since before my father got sick. You make me feel like maybe everything will be all right." He kissed her then, right there in front of the lawyer's office and the bank and anyone else who cared to watch. It was a gentle kiss, respectful but full of promise. When they broke apart, Grace was smiling despite everything. "We should probably not stand here kissing in public," she said, though she did not move away. "Probably not," Garrett agreed, but he kissed her once more anyway. Over the next 2 weeks, several things happened. Mr. Morton discovered that Leonard Webb had attempted to collect on supposed debts from at least 3 other recently deceased men in the Sacramento area. In each case, he produced promissory notes that the families insisted were fraudulent. One case had gone to court, and Webb had lost when a handwriting expert testified that the signature had been forged. Armed with this information, Morton filed a motion to dismiss Webb's claim against Grace and submitted evidence of his pattern of fraud. Meanwhile, Garrett helped Grace find work. Mrs. Hartley needed an assistant in her dress shop, someone who could help with customers and do basic alterations. The pay was modest but fair, and it came with the significant advantage of respectability. Grace threw herself into the work, grateful for the opportunity to earn her own way, and determined to eventually repay Garrett for all he had done for her. Their courtship continued and deepened. Garrett took Grace to church socials and town picnics. They went riding together. Grace perched awkwardly at first on a gentle mare from Patterson's stable, but gaining confidence with each outing. They talked for hours about their hopes and dreams, their fears and regrets. Grace learned that beneath Garrett's quiet exterior was a man of deep feeling and strong principles. Garrett discovered that Grace had a sharp wit and a love of laughter that had been suppressed by months of hardship. One evening, about 3 weeks after they had first met, Garrett took Grace to see a piece of land he had been considering. It was about 5 miles outside of Watsonville, 160 acres of rolling grassland with a creek running through it and a stand of oak trees on the highest point. The owner is willing to sell for a fair price, Garrett explained, as they stood beneath the oaks, watching the sunset. I have almost enough saved. Another 6 months of work, maybe less, and I could make an offer. This could be it, Grace. This could be where I finally stop drifting and start building something permanent. Grace looked out over the land, imagining the possibilities. You could have cattle here and horses, maybe plant some crops near the creek where the soil is rich. Build a house up here under the trees where you would catch the breeze in summer. We could have all of that, Garrett said quietly. If you wanted to, I mean. If you could see yourself here with me. She turned to look at him, her heart pounding. Garrett Brennan, are you asking me to marry you? He took both of her hands in his. I know it has only been 3 weeks. I know people will say we are being hasty, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. Grace, I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you washing that dress, refusing to give up even when you had every reason to. I want to buy this land and build our home here. I want to wake up next to you every morning and go to sleep with you in my arms every night. I want to build a life with you, full of love and laughter and all the things we have both been missing for too long. So, yes, I am asking you to marry me if you will have me. Tears streamed down Grace's face, but they were happy tears. Yes, 1,000 times yes. I love you too, Garrett. I think I have loved you since you offered to buy me breakfast and did not judge me for my worn-out dress. You saw me when I was at my lowest and treated me with kindness and respect. You have given me back my dignity and shown me what it means to be truly cared for. Of course I will marry you. He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small emerald set in it. I bought this yesterday. The emerald reminded me of your eyes. I was going to wait for the perfect moment, but standing here with you, looking at our future, this feels perfect enough. Grace held out her hand, and Garrett slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit as if it had been made for her. Then he kissed her properly, with all the love and passion he had been carefully restraining, and she kissed him back with equal fervor. Standing on the land that would someday be their home, they held each other as the stars began to appear overhead. The next day, they announced their engagement. Mrs. Hartley was delighted and insisted on making Grace's wedding dress as a gift. Mrs. Chen clapped her hands with satisfaction and said she had known they were meant for each other from the start. Mr. Patterson congratulated Garrett and told him about a bonus he had coming that would put him over the amount needed to buy the land. Even Mr. Morton smiled and said he was pleased to have contributed to such a happy outcome. Not everyone was pleased, of course. Leonard Webb made one last attempt to cause trouble, showing up at the boarding house one evening when he thought Grace would be alone. Unfortunately for him, Garrett was there too, and so was Mrs. Chen's nephew, who worked odd jobs around the property. Webb found himself facing two angry men and a Chinese woman with a broom, who looked ready to use it as a weapon. The lawyer says your claim is fraudulent, Garrett told Webb coldly. He has evidence that you have done this to other families. If you come near Grace again, I will have you arrested. If you keep pushing this, you will end up in jail. Is that clear? Webb glared at them all, but apparently decided discretion was the better part of valor. He left town the next day, and no one was sorry to see him go. Mr. Morton confirmed a week later that the case had been dismissed, and Grace was officially free of any supposed debt. With that cloud lifted, Garrett and Grace began planning their wedding in earnest. They decided on a simple ceremony at the church, followed by a reception at the hotel dining room, where they had shared their first meal together. The date was set for early September, giving Garrett time to close the deal on the land and start building a small house where they could begin their married life. The months between their engagement and the wedding passed quickly. Garrett worked from dawn until dark, splitting his time between his job at the Patterson Ranch and building their home. Grace continued working at the dress shop while also sewing curtains, quilts, and other necessities for their future household. Every Sunday after church, they would ride out to the land together to see the progress. The house was small but well built, just 3 rooms to start with a plan to add more as their family grew. Garrett constructed it with his own hands, with occasional help from other ranch workers who had become his friends. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room. A bedroom opened off to one side, and a small storage room that could be converted to another bedroom later sat on the other side. The house was positioned beneath the oak trees, just as Grace had suggested, and the view from the porch stretched out over their own land like a promise of good things to come. As their wedding day approached, Grace found herself overwhelmed by how much her life had changed in just 4 months. From washing the same dress 3 times at a creek, sleeping in an abandoned shed, and wondering where her next meal would come from, to being engaged to a wonderful man with a job she enjoyed and a future full of hope. It seemed almost impossible that so much could change so quickly. "Do you ever wonder if this is all a dream?" she asked Garrett one evening as they sat on the porch of their not quite finished house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Every single day," he admitted. "But then I look at you and I know it is real. The best things in life often come when we least expect them, from directions we never anticipated. I rode past that creek for weeks without really noticing it. But that particular morning, something made me look. And there you were washing that blue dress, and my whole life changed." "I still have that dress," Grace said softly. "The one you saw me washing. Mrs. Hartley mended it for me, and I have kept it. Not because I need it anymore, but because I never want to forget where I came from. I never want to forget what it felt like to have nothing, because it makes me appreciate everything we have now." "You are an amazing woman, Grace Owens, soon to be Brennan," Garrett said, pulling her close. "I am the luckiest man in California. I would say in all of America, but I will accept California," she teased, then kissed him soundly. Their wedding day dawned clear and beautiful. Grace wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Hartley had spent weeks perfecting. It was simple but elegant, with a fitted bodice and a full skirt that swished when she walked. Her dark hair was arranged in an elaborate style, with small flowers tucked into the curls. She carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Garrett had picked that morning from their own land. Garrett wore a new suit, the first one he had owned since leaving Kansas. His blonde hair was neatly trimmed, and his blue eyes shone with happiness as he waited for his bride at the altar. When Grace walked down the aisle on Mrs. Chen's arm, since she had no father to give her away, and Mrs. Chen had become like family, Garrett felt his throat tighten with emotion. She was so beautiful, and she was going to be his wife. The ceremony was traditional and heartfelt. They spoke their vows clearly, promising to love and honor each other through whatever joys and sorrows life might bring. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and told Garrett he could kiss his bride, the kiss was chaste and sweet, saving their passion for later when they were alone. The reception was a lively affair. It seemed like half of Watsonville had turned out to celebrate with them. There was food and drink, music and dancing. Grace danced with Garrett, with Mr. Patterson, with Mr. Morton, and with several of the ranch hands who had helped build their house. Garrett danced with his bride, with Mrs. Hartley, with Mrs. Chen, and even with the banker's wife, who had been skeptical of their hasty courtship, but had been won over by the obvious love between them. As the evening wore on and the party showed no signs of slowing, Garrett leaned close to Grace and whispered, "What do you say we slip away and go home? Our home, I mean. Start our life together properly. Grace's eyes sparkled with anticipation and just a touch of nervousness. I think that sounds perfect. They said their goodbyes and headed out to where Garrett's horse and wagon waited. He had decorated the wagon with ribbons and flowers, and several tin cans tied to the back rattled cheerfully as they drove through town toward their new home. It was full dark by the time they arrived, but Garrett had left lanterns ready to light, and soon the little house glowed with warm light. He carried Grace over the threshold, making her laugh with delight. Inside, everything was ready for them. The bed was made with the quilts Grace had sewn. The kitchen was stocked with supplies. Fresh flowers sat on the table. It was small and simple, but it was theirs, earned through hard work and blessed by genuine love. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, both of them nervous at first, but finding comfort in each other. Garrett was gentle with Grace, making sure she felt loved and cherished. Grace gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back. When they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, they both felt that they had found the place where they belonged. The early days of their marriage were full of joy and adjustment. Grace learned to cook on the wood stove in their kitchen, sometimes succeeding gloriously, and sometimes burning things spectacularly. Garrett learned that his wife was not a morning person, and that attempting conversation before she had her coffee was a risky proposition. They worked together to build fences and establish their herd, starting with 20 head of cattle that Garrett purchased from Mr. Patterson at a fair price. Grace discovered she had a talent for raising chickens, and soon they had fresh eggs every morning. Garrett found that he loved coming home from a hard day's work to find his wife waiting for him with a smile and a kiss. They were not wealthy by any means. Money was tight, and they had to be careful with every penny. But they were building something together, and that made even the hardest days worthwhile. When a late summer storm damaged part of their fence, they repaired it together. When one of the cows got sick, they nursed it back to health as a team. When the first winter came and brought unexpected cold, they kept each other warm and counted themselves blessed. In February of 1885, about 5 months after their wedding, Grace began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Garrett, not wanting to get his hopes up prematurely. When she finally confirmed it with the doctor in town, she decided to tell him in a special way. That evening, she made his favorite meal of beef stew and biscuits. After dinner, as they sat by the fire, she took his hand and placed it on her still, flat stomach. "There is someone who wants to meet you," she said softly. "In about 6 or 7 months." Garrett's eyes went wide as he understood. "You are pregnant? We are going to have a baby?" "We are going to have a baby," Grace confirmed, tears of happiness streaming down her face. Garrett let out a whoop of joy and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around. Then he immediately set her down, worried he might have hurt her. "Sorry, was that all right? I should be more careful now. Are you feeling well? Do you need to sit down? Should I get you some water?" Grace laughed at his sudden overprotectiveness. "I am fine, Garrett. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am not made of glass." But he was extra attentive anyway, making sure she did not work too hard and insisting she rest in the afternoons. As her pregnancy progressed, he took over more of the heavier chores while Grace focused on preparing for their baby. She sewed tiny clothes and blankets, transformed the storage room into a nursery, and read every book on childbirth and infant care that she could find. Their son was born in September of 1885, almost exactly a year after their wedding. The labor was long and difficult, but Grace was strong, and Garrett never left her side. When the doctor finally placed the squalling infant in Grace's arms, both parents wept with joy. They named him Thomas Henry Brennan, after both their fathers, and from the moment they saw him, they were completely in love. Thomas was a healthy baby, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. He was also, his parents discovered quickly, possessed of a powerful set of lungs and a determination to use them frequently. But they did not mind the sleepless nights or the constant demands. This tiny person was theirs, a living symbol of the love they shared. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the ranch grew too. Garrett's careful management and hard work paid off. Their herd expanded. They added a barn and a chicken coop. Grace started a garden that provided vegetables all summer and preserved goods for winter. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, and getting more so every year. In 1887, their daughter was born. They named her Margaret Rose, and she was the image of her mother with green eyes and delicate features. Where Thomas was bold and adventurous, Margaret was thoughtful and gentle. Together, the two children brought endless joy and occasional chaos to the Brennan household. Years passed in a blur of work and family and growing prosperity. Garrett bought more land as it became available, eventually expanding their original 160 acres to over 400. They built a larger house, keeping the original structure as a guest house for when Mrs. Hartley or Mrs. Chin came to visit. Grace's dress shop experience proved useful, and she began making clothes not just for her own family, but for other ranch wives who appreciated her skill and fair prices. In 1890, they welcomed twin boys, James and Joseph, who looked so much alike that even their parents sometimes had trouble telling them apart. In 1893, another daughter arrived, Emily Jane, with her father's blonde hair and a sunny disposition that made everyone smile. Through all the years and all the changes, Garrett and Grace never forgot how they had met. Every year on the anniversary of that day when he first saw her washing the blue dress, Garrett would give Grace a new dress. It became their tradition, a reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. Grace kept every single one, hanging them in the closet in their bedroom, a rainbow of fabric that represented the years of their life together. They faced hardships, of course. There were years when drought threatened their herd, and they had to make difficult decisions about which animals to keep and which to sell. There was the year when Thomas, at age 8, fell from a horse and broke his arm so badly that they feared he might lose it. But the doctor in Watsonville saved it, and Thomas healed completely, though he was more careful around horses after that. There was the influenza outbreak in 1892 that swept through the valley, taking several lives. The Brennan family isolated themselves on their ranch and emerged unscathed, but they mourned neighbors who were not so lucky. But the joys far outweighed the sorrows. They celebrated birthdays and holidays with laughter and love. They watched their children grow strong and capable, learning to work the land and care for the animals. They hosted barn dances that brought the community together. They built a life that was full and rich in all the ways that mattered. In the evenings, after the children were in bed, Garrett and Grace would sit on their porch and look out over the land they had built together. Sometimes they talked about the past, remembering those early days when Grace had only one dress and Garrett was just a drifting cowboy looking for a place to belong. Sometimes they talked about the future, making plans and dreaming dreams. And sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, needing no words to communicate the depth of their love and gratitude for each other. "Do you ever regret it?" Grace asked one evening in 1895 when they had been married for 10 years. "Taking a chance on a woman you barely knew? Spending your hard-earned money on someone who had nothing to offer in return?" Garrett pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Not for a single second. You were never someone who had nothing to offer. You had everything that mattered: strength, determination, dignity, and a heart full of love waiting for the right person to give it to. I was just lucky enough to be that person." "I was the lucky one," Grace insisted. "You saved me, Garrett, not just from poverty and hunger, but from hopelessness. You showed me that there was still kindness in the world, still people who would help without expecting anything in return. You gave me back my life." "We saved each other," Garrett said firmly. "I was drifting, remember? Working hard but never really living, never really connecting with anyone or anything. Then I saw you at that creek, and suddenly I had a reason to stop drifting. You gave me a home, Grace, not just this house or this land, but a place where I belong, a family to come home to, a love that makes every day worth living. They kissed then, with all the passion and tenderness of a couple who had loved each other through a decade of joys and sorrows, who had built a life together from nothing but hope and hard work, who knew each other's hearts as well as their own. As the years continued to pass, the Brennan Ranch became one of the most successful in the Watsonville area. Garrett's reputation for fair dealing and quality cattle spread, and he regularly sold breeding stock to other ranchers. Grace's sewing brought in extra income and gave her a creative outlet beyond the daily work of running a household. Their children grew up strong and capable, learning the value of hard work and honest dealing from their parents' example. Thomas showed an aptitude for working with horses and took charge of the ranch's horse breeding program when he was just 16. Margaret proved to have her mother's skill with a needle and helped Grace with the sewing business. The twins, James and Joseph, were inseparable and worked together as if they shared one mind, making them incredibly efficient at any task that required teamwork. Emily, the youngest, inherited both her parents' determination and showed early signs of being as stubborn and capable as either of them. In 1898, when Garrett was 40 and Grace was 35, they celebrated their 13th wedding anniversary by taking their children on a trip to San Francisco. It was the first time any of them had been to a big city, and the children were wide-eyed with wonder at the tall buildings, the cable cars, and the bustling streets. But after a week, they were all ready to go home to their quiet ranch and familiar routines. "The city is exciting," Thomas said on the train ride home, "but I would not want to live there. Too many people, too much noise. Give me open land and honest work any day." Grace smiled at her son, hearing echoes of his father in those words. "That is because you are a rancher at heart, just like your father. There is nothing wrong with that. The world needs people who are willing to work the land and raise good cattle and live simply." "I think I might like to see more of the world someday," Margaret said thoughtfully. "Not to live there, but to visit. There is so much beyond Watsonville, beyond California even. Do you not want to see it, Mother?" "I have everything I need right here," Grace said, glancing at Garrett with a smile that made him reach for her hand. "But when you are older, if you want to travel, your father and I will support that. We want all of you to find your own paths, whatever those might be." The children grew and eventually started families of their own. Thomas married a neighboring rancher's daughter in 1899 and built a house on the far side of the Brennan property. Margaret met a traveling salesman who proved to be steady and hardworking despite his wandering profession. They married in 1901 and settled in town, where he opened a shop and she continued her sewing work. The twins both fell in love with sisters from a family that had recently moved to the area, leading to a double wedding in 1902 that was talked about for years. Emily, true to her independent nature, announced at 16 that she was not interested in marriage yet and wanted to focus on learning the business side of ranching, which made her father beam with pride. Through it all, Garrett and Grace remained deeply in love. They had been together for nearly 20 years, and the passion of their early courtship had matured into something even deeper, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared goals, and absolute trust. They could communicate with a glance across a crowded room. They moved together in perfect synchronization when working side by side. They knew each other's thoughts often before they were spoken. "I was thinking," Grace said one evening in 1904, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset for what must have been the 1,000th time, "about that day you first saw me at the creek. Do you remember what you were thinking?" "I remember thinking that I had never seen anyone work so hard to maintain their dignity," Garrett said. "I remember thinking that anyone with that much determination deserved help. And I remember thinking that you were beautiful, even in that worn-out dress with your hands all red from scrubbing." "I was so embarrassed," Grace admitted. "I knew I must have looked terrible. I had been sleeping in that shed, eating whatever scraps I could find, wearing the same dress day after day. When you offered to buy me breakfast, I almost said no out of sheer pride. I am so glad I did not." "So am I. That breakfast changed both our lives." "You changed my life," Grace corrected. I was ready to give up, Garrett. I would not admit it, even to myself. But I was reaching the end of my rope. A few more weeks, maybe a month, and I do not know what would have happened to me. Then you rode by the creek and saw me and cared enough to help. You were my miracle. Garrett shook his head. We were each other's miracles. You gave me a reason to finally stop drifting and plant roots. You gave me a home and a family and a love I never thought I would find. Every good thing in my life started the day I saw you washing that blue dress. Speaking of which, Grace said with a smile, do you still have the receipt from Mrs. Hartley's shop, from when you bought me those 7 dresses? I think so. Why? Because I want to frame it and hang it in the house, a reminder of the day my life began again. The day you showed me that kindness still existed in the world. They found the receipt tucked away in an old trunk, yellowed with age, but still legible. Grace had it framed along with a photograph of them on their wedding day and hung it in the parlor where everyone could see it. Visitors would ask about it, and Grace would tell them the story of how a cowboy saw a woman washing the same dress 3 times and decided to do something about it. How that simple act of kindness led to love, marriage, a family, and a lifetime of happiness. As they grew older, Garrett and Grace slowed down but never stopped. They handed over more of the day-to-day ranch operations to Thomas and the twins, but remained active in decision-making and planning. Grace continued her sewing, though her eyesight was not as sharp as it once had been. Garrett still rode his horse every day, checking on the cattle and the land he had worked so hard to build into something lasting. They became grandparents and then great-grandparents, their family tree spreading and growing as the years passed. Every Sunday, the whole family gathered at the main house for dinner, filling the rooms with noise and laughter and love. Garrett and Grace would sit at the head of the table, watching their descendants eat and argue and tease each other, and feel a profound sense of satisfaction with what they had created together. In 1910, on their 25th wedding anniversary, the whole community threw them a party. It seemed like everyone in Watsonville came to celebrate the couple who had built something special out of nothing more than determination and love. There were speeches and toasts and a dance that lasted well into the night. But the best moment came when Garrett stood up and asked for everyone's attention. 25 years ago, he said, his voice still strong despite his 52 years, I was a drifting cowboy with no place to call home and no one to call my own. Then I saw a woman washing a dress at the creek, and everything changed. I do not know what made me stop that day. I do not know why I was moved to help a stranger, but I thank God every day that I did, because that decision brought me grace, and grace brought me everything else that matters. He turned to his wife, taking her hands in his. You are my home, Grace. You always have been. Not this house or this land. As much as I love them both, you are where I belong. You are my reason for everything. I love you today as much as I did when I first held you in my arms. Maybe more because now I know the strength of your character, the depth of your kindness, the breadth of your capacity for love. Thank you for saying yes when I asked you to marry me. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for every day of these 25 years. There was not a dry eye in the room when he finished. Grace stood and kissed her husband soundly, to the applause and cheers of everyone present. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, she said softly, just loud enough for him to hear. Thank you for caring when no one else did. Thank you for loving me so well. They danced together that night, moving slower than they once had, but with no less grace or connection. Their children and grandchildren watched and saw the love that had started with 7 dresses and grown into something that had touched so many lives. In the years that followed, Garrett and Grace continued their life together, facing the challenges of aging with the same partnership that had carried them through everything else. When Garrett developed arthritis that made working difficult, Grace was there to help him. When Grace's eyesight finally failed to the point where she could no longer sew, Garrett read to her every evening, his voice bringing to life the books she could no longer see for herself. They celebrated their 30th, 35th, and 40th anniversaries, surrounded by the family they had created. They watched the ranch continue to prosper under Thomas's management. They saw Margaret's sewing business expand to the point where she employed several other women. They celebrated as the twins' children grew up and started families of their own. They beamed with pride when Emily, who had never married but had become one of the most successful cattle breeders in California, won a prestigious award for her work. In 1919, as World War I ended and the world began to heal from that terrible conflict, Garrett and Grace sat on their porch and marveled at all the changes they had seen. The automobile had replaced the horse in many places. Electric lights were becoming common even in rural areas. The world was moving faster than ever before. Do you think we would have been happier if we had lived in simpler times? Grace asked, her head resting on Garrett's shoulder. We did live in simpler times, Garrett said. When we met, there were no automobiles in Watsonville, no electric lights, no telephones. The world has changed around us, but we changed with it. As long as I have you, any time would be the right time. Always the romantic, Grace teased gently, but she squeezed his hand to let him know she felt the same way. In 1924, they celebrated their 39th wedding anniversary quietly, just the two of them. Garrett was 66, and Grace was 61. Both moved more slowly than they once had, and both carried the aches and pains of lives well lived. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young man and young woman who had fallen in love at first sight all those years ago. 39 years, Grace marveled. 40 next year. Can you believe it? I can believe it, Garrett said. Every single day with you has been a gift, even the hard ones because we faced them together. Do you remember, Grace said suddenly, the blue dress? The one you saw me washing? Of course I remember. I think about it every time I look at you. I still have it. After all these years, through all the moves and changes, I kept it. Do you want to see it? Grace retrieved the dress from a trunk in the attic where she kept her most precious memories. It was even more faded now, the blue barely visible in places. The fabric was fragile with age, and the seams were holding on by threads. But when she held it up, they could both see the garment that had brought them together. This dress changed my life, Grace said softly. Not because it was special in itself, but because you saw me washing it and cared enough to do something. How many people rode past that creek? How many saw me and looked away? But you stopped. You saw me, really saw me, and you cared. Anyone would have done the same, Garrett said. No, Grace corrected firmly. Not anyone. Most people would have looked the other way. Most people would have thought it was not their problem. But you have always been different, Garrett. You have always seen what needs doing and done it without expecting anything in return. That is who you are. That is why I fell in love with you. They stood together, holding the old dress, remembering that long ago day when their lives had intersected at a creek outside Watsonville. Neither of them could have imagined then what their future would hold. Neither could have guessed that a simple act of kindness would grow into a love story that would span decades and touch so many lives. They celebrated their 40th anniversary in 1925 with all the family present. There were now over 50 people who called Garrett and Grace Brennan their ancestors, a sprawling family tree that was still growing. They gathered at the ranch for a week-long celebration that included a formal dinner, a dance, a picnic, and countless hours of storytelling as the older generation shared memories with the younger ones. On the actual day of their anniversary, Garrett gave Grace one more dress, as he had every year for 40 years. This one was soft lavender, made by Margaret and her team to her mother's exact specifications. Grace wore it proudly, even though at 62 she felt a bit foolish getting dressed up. But Garrett looked at her with the same love and admiration he had always shown, and she felt beautiful. 41 dresses, Grace said as they danced together that evening. If you count the 7 you bought that first day and one every year since, I now have 41 dresses because of you. I went from having only one dress that I had to wash every day to having more dresses than any reasonable woman could need. You deserve every one of them. Garrett said firmly, and 41 years of happiness, and however many more years God grants us together. They got 5 more years, 5 years of quiet contentment, of watching their family continue to grow, of savoring the life they had built together. Garrett's health began to fail in early 1930. The arthritis that had plagued him for years worsened, and he developed a persistent cough that the doctors could not seem to cure. Grace nursed him tirelessly, refusing to let anyone else take over his care. "I washed that dress 3 times because I had no choice," she told him one evening as she helped him into bed. "But I take care of you now because I want to, because you are my heart, Garrett Brennan, and I will love you and care for you until my last breath." He died peacefully in his sleep in April of 1930, with Grace holding his hand and their children gathered around. He was 72 years old and had lived a full, rich life. But Grace felt the loss of him like a physical blow. For 45 years, since that day at the creek, he had been her partner, her love, her home. Without him, the world seemed diminished. But she had his legacy all around her, in the form of the ranch they had built, the family they had created, and the love they had shared. She lived another 12 years, watched over and cared for by her children and grandchildren. She told the story of the 7 dresses countless times, wanting everyone to understand that love could start in the most unexpected ways and grow into something that lasted forever. Grace passed away in 1942 at the age of 79. She died in the same house she and Garrett had built together, in the same bed where they had slept for 45 years, surrounded by family who loved her. And when her children cleaned out her belongings, they found 46 dresses hanging in her closet, each one a reminder of Garrett's love. They found the original blue dress too, carefully wrapped and preserved as the most precious possession she owned. The Brennan family continued to prosper, generation after generation, carrying on the legacy of hard work, honest dealing, and genuine kindness that Garrett and Grace had established. The ranch stayed in the family for over 100 years, and everyone who worked it knew the story of how it had all started, with a cowboy who saw a woman washing the same dress 3 times and cared enough to help. It was a simple story in many ways. A man saw someone in need and offered assistance. A woman accepted help when she desperately needed it. 2 people fell in love and built a life together. But simple does not mean unimportant. Sometimes the simplest acts of kindness have the most profound consequences. Sometimes stopping to help a stranger changes the course of multiple lives. Sometimes love starts with nothing more than noticing someone who everyone else has overlooked. Garrett and Grace Brennan's love story began with 7 dresses purchased on faith and grew into a lifetime of devotion that created a legacy lasting far beyond their years. It proved that kindness matters, that love can bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, and that sometimes the best things in life start with simply caring enough to stop and help someone in need. Their story lived on in the memories of their descendants, a reminder that true love is built not on grand gestures, but on consistent care, mutual respect, and a willingness to see the worth in another person even when they are at their lowest point. And somewhere, perhaps, in whatever comes after this life, Garrett and Grace were together again. He would be the young cowboy with determination in his eyes, and she would be the beautiful woman with strength in her soul. They would dance beneath endless stars on land that knew no boundaries, forever bound by a love that started with 7 dresses and grew to encompass eternity itself. Their story would continue to inspire, to remind people that kindness and love are never wasted, and that sometimes the most important decision you can make is simply to stop and help someone in need,